got a request from a client. Hey, Andrew, we're laying off 85% of a team. We want you to coach them so that they stay happy.
Morale might drop when people find out that they're going to be fired and replaced with externals.
Are there people here with whom I could have a frank and perhaps uncomfortable conversation about my impact? If you can't answer yes to that question, you probably have some work to do.
A lot of companies are corporatizing toxic positivity. So if employees are overworked, the answer is not to find ways to alleviate the workload. The answer is they need to learn how to meditate.
Hello, awesome humans.
Hi, I'm Chuck.
And I'm Andrew.
And we are the Mindful Business Alliance, and we are committed to making work suck less.
Or as we say, humanizing the workplace.
Yay!
Yay!
So how's it going, Andrew?
Okay. So, Chuck, it's going okay. And my brain is a little upside down.
Yeah, what's on your mind?
I got a request. This is like for real. Okay, so I got a request from a client, somebody that you know. Here's the request. Hey, Andrew, we're laying off 85% of a team. We want you to coach them so that they stay happy. Will you do it? That's the request. And dude, it gets more trippy the more I had this conversation. And okay, this is for real. I keep saying that because it just sounds like it could just totally sound like it's made up. So here's the request. We're letting 85% of the team go. We're telling them at the beginning of the month. So next month.
Yes.
Here's the catch. We're telling them we're letting them go, but we're not actually letting them go for 5 more months. So we're telling them 5 months ahead of time that they're going to get fired. The reason we're telling them 5 months ahead of time is because we need to use those 5 months to get them to train the external people who are taking over their roles how to do their roles so that when they're gone, the company doesn't lose anything.
Oh, totally makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And what we need, Andrew, is we're worried that morale might drop. So
no. Morale might drop when people find out that they're going to be fired and replaced with externals.
I know.
Why would their morale? That's crazy. They should be happy about losing their jobs, right?
I think they should be happy about losing their jobs, but only in 5 months because some people lose them today. So
yeah, okay. So some will go now and some will go later.
So please use your coaching skill.
Yeah,
I know, right? So please use your coaching skills to help keep morale up until the 5 months have passed. And then they can be unhappy. But as long as they're not unhappy in the office, that'd be great.
Yes. Right. Because the priority is that anybody in that situation must be made happy somehow.
Please be happy.
Yes.
There's so many things wrong with this.
Happiness will be enforced. Yes.
Well, first of all, think about all the organizations we work with. I don't know that happiness is at the top of anyone's agenda. And, there are legitimate arguments for why that's not necessarily an important thing, right? Productivity, wellness, well-being, and so on. But yeah, I think I've been in this game for a pretty long time. And, you've been in even longer, but I'm pretty sure that this is the first time I've ever been asked to come and coach a team to stay happy when their worlds are effectively ending, as far as they know from a career perspective.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was left a little bit baffled by this one. And of course, I had the conversation with the client.
Of course.
But anyway, so Chuck.
So
That's how I
here we
am.
go. That's how you are. And that's perfect because that's what we are here to talk about today, which is something that we call toxic positivity. So you've probably heard this phrase, toxic positivity. It is coming up more and more in business settings because there are organizations or leaders who are trying to enforce happiness, positivity, at the expense of authenticity. So when we talk about toxic positivity, we're talking about people who are pushing a happy attitude in such a way that people feel like they can't bring up things that are problematic. They can't openly struggle with anything. They have to stay positive. And in this case, the case that you're presenting here, it reminds me of something that we were noticing over the last decade or so, which is a lot of companies are corporatizing toxic positivity. So if employees are overworked, the answer is not to find ways to alleviate the workload. The answer is they need to learn how to meditate. They need yoga classes, right? They need coping mechanisms for the work demands that are so over the top that no normal person could cope. So this all kind of falls under the banner of toxic positivity. And I think where it might be helpful for us to focus today is on the individual experiences of leaders inside of companies. So the question we would put out to our audience is, are you maybe unintentionally creating or supporting a toxically positive environment?
This is a very good place to be looking. And it's out there for sure. I know that I've had conversations in the last couple of weeks. It's, multiple conversations with different people. And it really is out there. It really is a current theme. So yeah, we'd
Yeah.
be really curious to
Yeah.
hear from people like what are the experiences they're having. And I think you're pointing to something really interesting about the unconscious nature of a lot of this.
Oh, yeah.
When we hear, there's a conversation that we were in last week, I think, around wellness with the client, and we hear these things. And you mentioned meditation as an example, right? Or I forget what the other example you gave there was.
Mindfulness,
Mindfulness, yes.
yoga classes. Yeah.
These are really good, almost like marketing tools for come work for us because we offer these things. And it was making me think of how, as individuals, we filter or mask the things that we can't face or that we don't want to acknowledge about our lives, right? Maybe
Right.
maybe I eat too much chocolate because I don't want to deal with my health and fitness. Maybe people drink too much because they don't want to deal with their feelings. And it's almost like how we mask the things that we don't want to process or acknowledge about ourselves, or in this case, our businesses, by
Yes.
putting these things in place which look good. I'm gonna I don't know, go on self-development courses every weekend, and I'm gonna tell you how great I'm doing. But I'm still a bit of a mean person most of the time. But I'm doing self-development, so I'm actually fine, and that's kind of what it made me think of.
Yeah. So I think you're bringing up a few things here. One is that in the wrong hands with the wrong intentions, a well meaning tool could be a weapon. So, for example, a lot of organizations have embraced yes and. We don't say but anymore because but contradicts. We don't say that's a good idea, but it has some problems. We'll say that's a good idea and I see some problems with it because the and is so much nicer than the but. And it's so much more welcoming and creates psychological safety and all this kind of stuff. So they learn these tools and then they end up weaponizing the tools.
You're reminding me of one of my favorite phrases. This is where I've never thought about this as an organizational in an organizational context. But you've heard me say this about individuals. Weaponizing our enlightenment.
Yes, yes, definitely.
And this feels like, okay, the theme of well-being at work is current and it's appropriate. It's an absolutely necessary thing to be thinking about. Are people safe in the workplace? Are they using language that's appropriate with one another? Are they being aggressive?
Mhm.
You and I have a common friend who started a new job just yesterday, and one of the first things she had to go through was an onboarding around the kind of language we use when we're struggling. Fantastic! I thought it was fascinating. Right? She shared it with me about like how the company actually. I don't know that it's a policy, but they are really clear about if you are upset or struggling and you use aggressive or what could be termed abusive language, you will be taken aside and a conversation will be had.
Mm.
It's like unacceptable. And I think this is quite smart.
Well, it's making me think about another situation. This is someone else that we've done business with, who I think was a really good example of this. If I brought up something that I was having trouble with, like maybe she said something in a meeting and I wanted to talk to her about it because I found it hurtful, oftentimes the response would be something like, "I'm so sorry you misunderstood me. I deeply regret the misunderstanding that you made of what I said," right? So it was there was never an apology for anything that she did. She was always apologizing for my interpretation of it, and I was like, okay, I get this is how we're going to do these conversations. It's not quite that. I mean, toxic positivity can be much more like what they call gaslighting, where you try to persuade somebody that things aren't as they appear, you know. um, and oftentimes, I think to the point you were bringing up earlier, this is not necessarily an organizational thing, attribute. It's usually something that individuals have, and where it comes from is a lot of times that individual is uncomfortable with confrontation or uncomfortable with negative emotions. And so and it happens in social circles too. How many times have you had a friend say, "It's going to be okay," or "It's not so bad," or "At least you're alive," or some version of that where look on the bright side. And, in the right context, sometimes that's okay. But a lot of times it feels like, don't feel that way. Don't have those negative feelings because I can't deal with them. Let's just put a happy face on it. So that's usually what's behind all this.
Chuck, just think positive.
Yes, just
Just,
think positive.
just think
I'm
positive.
trying. I'm trying to think positive.
Well, if you try
But
harder, it'll be okay.
we're
Yep.
ignoring the negative.
Yeah.
And I think for some people it is really a struggle because not everyone can do that kind of mental gymnastics of I will find the positive perspective.
Well, one of the things that's lacking here is, I think, one is just the sort of the, I want to say like the personal education on this. So I think this level, emotional intelligence can take you so far. If you haven't had the opportunity or the privilege to have feedback and good mentors and take time out for self development, which is not something everybody has access to, then yeah, this is going to be tricky. But I think you make an
Yeah.
interesting observation here, which is it's typically down to the individuals rather than a corporate culture.
Right.
Occasionally, for sure, there'll be corporate cultures that have said, we're prioritizing wellness. And it's interpreted as no more negativity, which is sort of a substitute for we can't have difficult conversations. But you're right, for the most part, it's more the individuals. Where it gets particularly tricky is when you throw hierarchy into the mix.
Yes.
If I have a junior person in my team or in my organization who's not very good at articulating their frustrations or their distress, or their struggles, well, I can call them up on it. If I'm a decent leader who can observe these things, I can do that in a way that doesn't make it personal, doesn't make them wrong, that mentors them, supports them, develops them. But if you flip that dynamic, then you have a boss who does this. This gets complicated really fast.
It is.
Because I've got a
Yes.
boss who doesn't listen or who most likely unintentionally manipulates with their faux wisdom. I call it the airport book wisdom. I picked up an airport book on management, so now I can say all the right things. We care about you. You are important to us. Play the long game for the business, whatever, all this rah rah. It gets difficult really fast when those dynamics come into play.
Yeah. Right. Because you can't say what you really think. And there were plenty of, we coach people with this all the time. How do I manage up? How do I let my manager know that their approach is causing me a lot of stress? So one example I'll give you that's kind of interesting, because how often do we hear this in any of our trainings, where the managers will say, I have this one employee who will not open up to me, who I'll ask a question and I get one word answers. And when I hear this, I always think that's interesting, because there could be a lot of reasons for that behavior. But a lot of times it comes down to that employee does not feel safe. That employee does not trust this manager with whatever they would really say. They don't feel like they could say it. And so they just say the bare minimum. I'm not going to say what I really think because it will not be okay for me to say this.
Yeah.
So, yeah. One of the other signs is managers will have meetings.
Oh, meetings. And that could have been
meetings,
an email.
Of course.
That could have been an email, Chuck. Just think positive.
So many of them.
Think
so
positive.
Many of them.
Okay, sorry, you were saying. Yes.
Well, let's say it's a meeting. My intention as a manager is we have this new project. I want to motivate the team. I want to get them on board with this project. And so I talk at them for 20 to 30 minutes about how great this is going to be. And then I ask, who's got ideas? Who's got input? And there's nothing. That could also be another example of this manager has done way too much toxic positivity and has not made it safe to say, there are some issues here.
I'm clenching my teeth here because I just did a debrief with one of our team the other day about a project that they were on not so long ago.
Yeah.
I'm clenching my teeth and I'm hesitating because I want to be respectful of our client situations here. But the example that came up was, and this will be familiar to you because I'm sure you'll recognize what I'm speaking about. But this is something that we've seen so many times as well, which is sort of an extension of this. I'm going to call in a company to do development for our leaders because I once went on a training that was really positive for me. So I want you to create something that's really positive for them and really deep and, helps us to evolve. And I'd like to say a few words to the team before we start in order to really fire the engines, get them excited about what's possible and how important this is for the business. And then the leader stands up and talks with, an agreed 5-minute slot to kick off the training. And 45 minutes later, they're still talking. And when they stop talking, our colleague, as she's recounting this to me, she says, I don't actually know what he said. But what I heard during the course of that training is this is a leader who's always telling the team that they're available, that their door is open, that you can come to them anytime. But all I heard from the team was, he is none of those things. He is not available. He does not listen to feedback or suggestions. He doesn't listen full stop. But
by the way, just because you were like, oh, I don't know if I should say this because it's a client of ours. This has happened so many times in so many of our trainings that I wouldn't say this is any one person or one company. This has happened so many times.
Actually, fair point.
Right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. The leader comes in because they want to get everyone excited and they haven't done their homework. They don't really know what we're covering. They don't fully understand it. And they say a bunch of stuff. And then sometimes we have to clean up after them and kind of correct some of what they
Right.
said about the training. Right. So
Right.
there's a bunch of stuff like this. Again, it does have a toxicity to it if people are not more careful. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the cues, because one of the things that I think we want to get to in this conversation is, what can leaders do about this? If how can you know if you're inadvertently creating a toxically positive environment, and what do you do to correct it? So one of the things I would say is, if you expect a bunch of people to go through a training and you don't want to go through that training too because you already get it or you are past that, that has some toxicity to it. That will not be well received by your team.
This is a really valuable point. The impact of having had the experience and how you convey that to people is super important.
Yes.
I think the other thing there is, if you haven't cultivated the kind of relationships in that group of people with at least one or two people who could honestly tell you your impact, if you ask them, you probably have some
Yeah.
work to do, regardless of what conversation you're having, corporate platitudes or other. If you look at your team and ask yourself honestly, are there people here with whom I could have a frank and perhaps uncomfortable conversation about my impact? If you can't answer yes to that question, you probably have some work to do.
Yes. Oh,
The
totally agree.
mm,
Yes.
the other part of this, and this is perhaps more confronting, is to ask yourself, would you want to listen to you?
Ooh.
I think we all have some sense. And I can see
Mm.
if you've got a particularly skillful narcissistic kind of boss, maybe they would be like, of course, who wouldn't? But I think if most of, I can think back to a time when I know I didn't have the ability to do that in a way that felt compelling. I got a little shy talking to people. I wasn't clear in how to tell a
Mm.
good story with meaning and purpose behind it for the sake of motivating people. Like, those are things I learned over time, and I'm by no means would I say that today I'm great at these things, but I, I do have a sense of how am I doing? What do I want to achieve? Like, there's a sort of a thought process to this, like an intentionality, I guess I'm saying. And I've had feedback.
Yes. That's key. That you've been receiving feedback over time, and you're also doing a fair amount of self-observation. We do this in some of our trainings. We have leaders um, video record themselves giving presentations, and it is super uncomfortable to see yourself on video, but you'll learn a lot from it, for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's really crucial. And what you're reminding me also of is the importance of the one-on-one conversation, because groups will tend to sort of agree on a positive tone. Groups will naturally kind of equalize around positivity because it's super uncomfortable when you're in a group setting if if the general feeling is negative. So people will kind of level set around positivity in groups. This is why it's so important to be able to pull people aside, have one-on-one conversations that are very frank. I'm a big fan of, like, now that a lot of people are coming back to the office, go for a walk, uh, sit over a cup of coffee, have a meal with somebody one-on-one, and make sure it's in an environment where they can be really honest, not in earshot of a bunch of other people, and really invite that kind of feedback. Really important.
There's an underlying part to what you're saying here, which I'm not sure was articulated specifically, and it's the listening
Mm.
part.
Yes.
I think if leaders can focus on, develop, practice their skills of listening, which is
Mm.
different from hearing. I'm hearing the word you're saying versus I'm listening to the intention and the experience behind the word you're saying. I think there's a depth to listening that I think many people miss. If you're really listening, you'll probably find that the sort of the corporate platitudes or the weaponized enlightenment urges tend to subside because you're less
Mm-hmm.
likely to be defensive or needing to justify or
Mm.
explain your answers. If you're really listening, you're actually present with people. You're you're in a better position to actually just have a really decent impact and not need to sort of put this filter on to protect your whatever, your sensitivity, your ego, your insecurity, whatever. All like relatable and
Mm.
what's the word I'm looking for? These things can show up. It's okay, but
Yeah.
we don't have to filter it.
It's also a skill that I think a lot of leaders really need to cultivate, which is to speak and listen at the same time. So we're told that this is not possible. And in some ways, it is not possible. Like you can't, obviously, two people can't speak at the same time and really hear each other. But what you can do while you're speaking is watch how your message is being received. And especially, I think in group settings, really important for leaders to notice: have you just put the room to sleep? Are people still with you? Are you talking while they're taking out their phones and checking their messages? Like, what's actually going on here? And I think it's useful to be able to say, okay, it seems like I've lost you. Where did we get off track here? Like use it as an opening to have a conversation, invite people to let you know. That's a feedback moment. It's perfect. You're getting feedback. It's nonverbal, but you're getting feedback about what's happening. Or, you're saying, guys, this new project is going to be great. And you look up and you see your team is like, they're looking at you with their eyes wide. They're looking terrified. That's a signal. Something is not right here. You can ask about it.
I think one way to put this is what we're aiming for is that in the moments when you're absolutely bombing it, you want to have a relationship with your people that is so good that they could say, boss, read the room.
Yes.
Read the room,
Yes.
boss. Yeah.
Yes. Like that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. That would be fantastic. Yeah.
some good things here. I would always want to be cultivating those kind of relationships. Joking aside, like, gosh, it's kind of like having something in your teeth. Like, please let my friends or my colleagues around me be the kind of people who would say,
Oh,
dude,
yeah.
let us,
Right.
dude,
Exactly.
sweet corn, 3 teeth to the left. Like everybody, everybody's
Hopefully.
leadership
Yes.
should be at least it's sweet corn to the left, sir, or ma'am,
Yes.
whatever.
Well, I think, the other thing is, so this is about having a balanced experience. This is not about, so some people might hear this and say, oh, okay, I've been way too positive. I need to be super negative now. It's not that. It's definitely not that. It's because if you invite too much critical thinking or critical voice, then that's all you're going to have. It is finding a balance and communicating as a leader and even role modeling as a leader that you have range, that you actually are comfortable moving in the positivity place, moving into optimism and enthusiasm, and you're okay with someone having a bad day, and we're just going to be there for this person. Like you're okay with all of it. You're okay with team members saying, I'm really struggling, and not trying to necessarily make it all better by putting a happy face on it. So, one of the fixes here is really listen when people are communicating that they're struggling. And sometimes listening means give them some time and space to express the struggle even before you offer a solution. Because you might think, oh, I'm just going to offer a solution that will fix it. Not until they've been heard. So that's the other piece is like fixing fast is also can be toxic positivity. We know this from coaching. We know this all the time.
We do it. it makes me think, like, the word that comes to mind as I was listening to you there was like sincerity above all else.
Mm-hmm.
Be sincere. Be
Yeah,
sincere. You know,
for sure.
there is no role that needs to be played here. There is no pretending to be something different because we're in a workplace. We're human beings. You know, it's not always going to fit, but there's an analogy I like to throw into this. It is often in a coaching environment, but it's like, if you wouldn't talk to your mother or your brother or your closest loved ones like this, then don't do it to your employees either. Like, you can still maintain hierarchy and the power balances that whatever are expected in certain situations. You can still have all of
Mm.
those and still be a decent human.
Yeah.
We don't need to almost role play our way through these things. There's a level
Right.
of just be yourself that is going to help.
So here's a dilemma, because part of me is thinking we want to encourage people to role model how to do this. So if you're a leader and you're having a really hard day, um, if you're practicing what we're teaching here and not wanting to just paper it over with toxic positivity, how do you open up to your team members? Well, like I can imagine people, I'm not going to just break down and cry in front of a whole meeting full of people. Do you fall apart in front of them? Do you let them see that side of you?
I would lead with what you just led with here.
Hmm.
Hey, folks, I'm having a bit of a tough one here. I'm not sure where to go or whatever, but I think leading with the experience you're having, you don't need to explain it. You don't need to justify it.
Hmm.
You don't need to apologize for it. Oh, unless you do. If you're having a crappy impact, I think an apology is going to be important. But I think there's something
Hmm.
really valuable about, and this is back to the sincerity / be yourself. Folks, I'm having a rough one. I've been a little impatient. I'm struggling because I don't actually know where to point us here. But I want you to know that I'm on it. And if anybody has any
Hmm.
suggestions that will help, please let me know. There's something about owning it. I'm having a
Hmm.
hard day. And if you fall apart, you fall apart. But I would wager that for the most part, the ability to articulate the experience you're having is enough to diffuse the terror that you have about being exposed or falling
Yes,
apart or whatever. The fact that you can say it out loud is enough to take the pressure off.
I think that's brilliant. That it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. You're not sitting there expecting a big group hug from your team, but you are just being open about the fact that you're struggling or you're having a rough day. And you'll show them when you have better days too,
Yeah, this
right?
is
And
leading
so
by
you're
example.
not, yeah, you're not just one thing. You're a lot of things.
Right.
Full
It's
human.
leading by example.
Um, One thing I wanted to get your take on, especially because we are international in our work. There are some cultures that that insist on positivity, especially in group settings. Most cultures do in some way, but some more strongly than others. And so I can imagine that there are places where it's kind of expected that everyone in the office is going to have a smile on their face. How do you make it okay for someone to have a rough day or for someone to tell you something uncomfortable when that's not typical for them, especially across hierarchy?
It's going to be a little bit more delicate, I would imagine. Certainly, I think about the cultures we've worked in where those things would be important. I would lead with that too.
Mm.
I think it's okay to speak to the circumstances you're in, right? Hey, I know we are predominantly a culture that, XYZ. Speak to the dream or the vision that you have, the hope that you have around this, right? I would love for us to be able to, you know,
Mm. Mm.
ABC, because DEF. I think there's like you're inviting people into a conversation rather than imposing something. You and I know well, certainly for the parts of the world that well, certainly where I live, if we have Western cultures coming in and imposing their ways of being, it is really awful. Like the impact can be really, really, really complex and
Yes.
unpleasant. I think if we're inviting people into a conversation and we're giving people full choice about what they do or don't do with this, I think that's okay. But I think there is an element of respect, making
Yeah.
sure that choice is an option.
I'm liking your formula, and I want to challenge you to fill in the blanks with what is the ABC, what is an example of ABCDEF? Like how would you fill in those
Oh,
if you're being a real manager?
okay. Let me think back to what I said. So I know that this is a culture where we're predominantly positive and happy, and it's important not to lose face. So one of the things I notice is we might be a little cautious about offering each other feedback to help grow one another. My vision here would be that we could do this collectively so that if we see something that could be improved, rather than just sitting on it, we find ways to share it with one another that is respectful of people's challenges
Yeah.
and the obstacles that they face. We do it in a way that is protective of face saving. But we're doing it so that as a community, as an organization, as a business family, there is a sense of we're all doing something together to move us to the next level. And I'd love to explore ways in which we could have those conversations without anybody feeling upset or bruised. Like, what would some of those things be based on your experience?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm inspired. I'll go to that meeting.
Cool. Thanks. And the bit I said, yeah, that is a meeting, not an email, by the way.
Yeah.
But
Good.
yeah, one of the things I didn't say was, of course, it's a thing that we're at choice here. I wanna explore it. I don't know if it would work, but I'd love to give it a try if you're up for it, and if you're not, that's okay. I think that would be probably the final piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it is, in any office setting, work setting, it's going to be like anything else, a set of experiments. Like what does work the best for this particular group of people won't be the same for everybody.
Mm.
And you will have individual personalities that are going to have easier and harder times with this, you know? Um, it, so the mirror image of the toxic positivity is the toxic negativity. You will have people on the team, and including some leaders, who can't help but you know mess with the mood and kill everyone's joy. They and for them, they're helping. Maybe they think they're saving the team from problems by um, dropping some bomb into a very what is that, dropping a skunk into a garden party, whatever the metaphor is. They think they're helping. And so what do you do with that? Because you're not, it's similarly unfair to insist that those people put on a happy face, but they are having an impact.
Alan, just think positive. Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky. There is no like magic bullet for everything here. I think if we are back to many of the things that have come up in this conversation, if we are being sincere, if we are reading the room, if we are listening rather than talking at people, if we're curious about our impact and about the needs of the people around us, we could get curious about what's happening with those individuals. We're not going to win everybody, but I think if we're not stepping over it or pretending it's not happening, we're probably already doing really well to equalize the sensitivities that are in the space. I may not be able to resolve whatever's going on for that individual, but I could imagine that my team would feel better if they knew I was trying to do something about it, even if I can't, rather
Yes.
than avoiding it and saying, that's just Alan. Sorry to any listeners whose name is Alan. I totally
I
made that
know. I
up.
was wondering if you were talking about me, but yeah.
Oh, gosh. I didn't even think about that. My default was
It's like,
John, and I
hey,
think
there I go again.
oh, I just like John gets a bad rap because John always comes up easily. So I was like,
There's
oh,
always
there's
John.
always a John.
There's always a John.
Sorry,
Yes, we need a fictional name that we can pick on. Exactly.
sorry, Alan and Mr.
Who could it be?
Allens. But yeah,
Yeah, that's
so
okay. That's all right.
yeah, there are always like there's always going to be some level of toxic positivity creeping in here or there. But I think if there's anything we can take away from this conversation, it's just let's not step over it. Let's create environments where it's okay to have the conversation about what people need and get curious about what's going on so that maybe these environments can be a little bit better.
Yeah. And I would add not just what people need, but what they are going through. You know, I think in a lot of teams right now, people are struggling. They may be overwhelmed, overworked. They may be scared for various reasons. And I think it's important to invite the conversation. I think it's also important that it goes somewhere, that people get a sense that they've been heard. So, we're saying like, don't immediately jump to solutions. Make sure people feel heard first. But then if you're the leader, you probably need to start looking for some solutions. Because that's the other side of making sure people feel heard. Like there is often something to be solved here. So one of the other pieces I would offer in way of wisdom around toxic positivity is whatever people are avoiding saying or not saying, it's probably an important thing to hear. It's useful information about what is really going on. And if you're not hearing it, you're missing something big. So whatever it takes to get over that and make sure you can hear it, it's going to be worth it.
This makes me like I sort of want to offer this almost like a final, maybe a little confronting thought, but I think the question any leader wants to be asking themselves in this as well, because they're going to have influence and impact on the system regardless of whether it's actually, whether they are the main problem or not. But I think the question I would want any really mindful leader to be asking is, where in all of this am I the problem?
Always. I mean, always ask that for sure.
Yeah.
Yes. And then for people who find themselves in these environments that feel toxically positive, if you feel like the situation really sucks and nobody's saying it, you're probably right. It probably does really suck. So it's by way of saying, if you feel like you might be the crazy one because you're the only one noticing the problem, you may not be the crazy one. Right? It could be your boss. It could be your team.
Wow. So much food for thought here. This has been a fun topic to explore with you today, Chuck.
It has. Absolutely. So there's more to say, but I think we can call it for now and say that's all for now.
Stay safe, stay kind.
And stay human.
Yay.